Yeah, and chatting with David Kramer, it's the first in hopefully very many profile interviews that I'm going to have with people that have really contributed hugely to not just the social fabric of the city, but through very trying times, just try to, bring another kind of view to the issues of the past. And David Kramer is our guest. That conversation about luck really had me thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, it helps to be optimistic and you deal with the bad luck better than the pessimists.
Yeah, maybe. But definitely, I do. I believe. People. I think I've experienced a lot of luck in my life, but that's because I put a lot out there.
So you say it's commensurate with the effort that you put in?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it takes a lot of work. The people don't see. People see you, enjoying the benefits of work that they're not aware of.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
well, there's that kind of stuff as well. But so they see the success. But then, but like behind the musicals and so on, there's 18 months of slog has gone into that, and a lot of thinking and ideas and taking risks. I mean, this whole thing about taking risks and putting yourself out there.
Absolutely. You are fully bilingual.
I am. Well, more English than Afrikaans, but
that's what I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, I'm kind of known as an Afrikaans singer-songwriter, but I grew up speaking English at home. And
even in Worcester?
In Worcester, yeah. And it's not Worcester, it's Worcester.
Well, you must be the only one in Worcester.
The Earl of Worcester.
It's like Worcester.
Yeah, Worcester, yeah, die Worcester plek.
So jy's eintlik Engels. You actually speak in English.
Ja, en I think in English en maar ek kan Afrikaans vlot praat as jy wil en ek het groot geword in die Boland en skool gegaan daar Engelse klas en Afrikaanse skool. So ek het baie Afrikaans gehoor en in my familie ook mense het Engels en Afrikaans gepraat.
Yeah.
I mean, we switch codes.
Afrikaanse musiek, exactly. I mean,
we switch codes, all the time. I became very interested in the Afrikaans language in about the late 1970s, because before that, after school and when I went to university, I became political, and I bought into the idea of not speaking Afrikaans as a political statement. I bought into that idea, sort of, press's language and this kind of thing.
Yes.
But in 1977, we were reading a little bit of history and doing a bit of research, stuff that I was never exposed to or never taught at school because it was all a secret, was that Afrikaans, so I started to realize that Afrikaans it can't be claimed as a white man's language, and it certainly isn't the oppressor's language, and the more you scratch down into that, you find it's the language of the oppressed. It was the language of the oppressed, and I discovered that through folk songs.
So I want to take you back to Worcester.
Worcester.
To Worcester. Yeah. Were you born there?
I was born in Worcester, in the Pines.
And your parents, how did they find themselves there?
Well, my grandfather was a Lithuanian refugee, a Jewish refugee from in the late 1800s, or just nearly at the turn of the century. He came out to South Africa. He was 17 years old.
There was quite a few Lithuanian refugees, and they would settle in the District 6 part and be an integral part of that community.
There was that, yeah. There was a lot of that. There was, the big Jewish component in District 6. My grandfather didn't go there. He, for some reason, went up to Van Reinsdorp.
Oh, wow.
And the first language he learned was Afrikaans. And then he went to Klein Karoo, and he settled in the Oudtshoorn Ladysmith district because it was the ostrich feather boom, and he became an ostrich feather smous, and he was dealing with the ostrich feathers. And then he met my oma. My oma was a van der Vyver.
So this is an Afrikaner woman.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, and they got married. And she was a big woman, and he was a small man.
This is your grandmother and your grandfather.
Yes, this is my grandmother, Oma, on that side. My opa, Kramer. On my mother's side, her mother was from London,
Wow.
And my grandfather was from Malmesbury, and he went over to London because he studied hairdressing. He became a professor of hairdressing, and he met my grandmother, who was a hair model. She had beautiful red hair, which he used to style for competitions. And he also, at the time, did the hair of the royal family.
My goodness.
Yeah, well, that's, I don't know too much about that, and it might be part of the mythology. And so on my mother's side, also sort of quite an interesting background. But anyway, my grandfather, when the ostrich feather boom, bottomed out, and suddenly there was no money in that area, and he had a little shop on the farm, and people owed him a lot of money, and the drought came, and the depression came in the 1930s, and then he moved his family to Towers River. Firstly, they had a boarding house because they were building a railway line or something in Towers River, and they had a boarding house there, and then moved to Worcester. And and my grandfather worked as a furniture salesman, and my father worked alongside him later on.
That's right. Somebody actually told me that they had purchased, or their parents had purchased, a piece of furniture from your father.
Yes, I get that story often. Like, oh, we've got a dining room suite in our house that my mother bought from your grandfather. Yeah.
I'm trying to understand how. Okay, I get that the hairdresser, but there's a bit of creativity running in some part of your blood there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
How did that creativity manifest first with you? Waar het jy begin? When did you begin to understand yourself as a musician specifically?
I think as a lot of performers will tell you that story, of when you're young, 6, 7 years old, and you start entertaining your family in the lounge. I was born with rock and roll. Born in 1951. 1957 was the big grand year was the big rock and roll year. And on the radio, I'd heard, of course, people like Elvis Presley and Bill Haley, and even I'd heard Buddy Holly, and one of the that song, "All My Love, All My Kisses, You Don't Know What You Be Missing, No Boy." Anyway, so as a little boy, I was imitating these songs, and my grandfather, the Opa from Lithuania, he bought me a little ukulele, and I started to, and I was Olik, I was Olik, and I liked that attention, and I think that's where it started for me.
So, rock and roll.
Yeah.
Here's a voice note in. It says, we're on a road trip. We're staying over at the Royal Hotel. Where does the Afrikaans music come in? Let's start with that rural kind of influence.
Okay. So then the furniture shop,
yes,
I think is the important one, because I used to spend a lot of time there as a kid. And next to the furniture shop was a bottle store. And on a Saturday morning, farmers brought the farm labourers in for shopping. And the pickup point was in front of our furniture shop next to the bottle store. And there was lots of singing and carrying on, and the guys would come into the shop and try out the guitars. I remember in our shop, the guitars hung against the wall, these cheap guitars, the Galbellinis and the Gallows and those kind of guitars. And I used to sit there listening to this music. So I heard the first Afrikaans farm music at that point in my life.
And it's the labourers that were playing it outside.
Yeah, and that's what and again, that's what led me to this kind of idea or a realization that Afrikaans was not as I'd been taught, It wasn't, and these songs, Bobbejaan klim die berg, and if you actually start to analyze the lyrics, you see, hang on, but die boere het nie die geskryf nie. Is die ouens wat vir die boere gewerk het wat dit geskryf het. Bobbejaan klim die berg so hastig en so lastig om die boere te vererg, hoera vir die Jolly Bobbejaan. So it's a kind of a protest song from a labourer's point of view.
I want to get into that some more, and I want to get into Afrikaans, the language, and how you reconciled it differently afterwards. But there's Kathy out in Durbanville who wants to chat with you, and I want to remind you, it is David Kramer, and I did ask him, please, will you be our very first profile person for an interview on Monday? And he accepted the invitation. It's such a privilege for me to be in conversation with David Kramer. And it's your opportunity, too, to maybe share a memory, ask him a question, or just send us, call us 021 446 0567 or WhatsApp 072 567 1567. Kathy, that's the number you've dialed.
Good morning, Clarence. First of all, I want to thank David for correcting you. It is not Worcester, it is Worcester.
I like to understand why the correction, because I'm like, what am I doing wrong?
Well, you don't say Worcester sauce, you say Worcester sauce.
Do you?
Yeah. And
Yes.
it's named after the Earl of Worcester. It was yeah.
Well, there you go.
And so
So
you're pronouncing
okay.
it with a V rather than with a W.
Okay.
So you're
Is that the
giving the
English
Afrikaans spin on the woes.
Ek is jammer, ek is Afrikaans.
And it's probably, and even the Worcester is probably a deviation from the original pronunciation of W.
Worcester.
Yeah, Worcester.
I think the Worcester is worse than Worcester. But you were saying, so you're from Worcester as well. It's
So I'm from Worcester, and my brother and I were also born in the Pines. But my father bought David's wife's little blue Escort with a little blue porcelain bird for me as my second little car, and I named her Bluebird.
Wow.
So I don't know whether David knew at that stage whether he was in a relationship with his wife and he knew the little blue Escort.
I can't say I have a very strong memory about that, but she probably had. I remember having, when I first met her, having a little Anglia car, a Ford Anglia. But anyway.
Okay, well, I got a little blue Escort.
Ah, well, good for you.
Too, so, well, anyway, it was lovely hearing all the news.
Do you still have it? Do you still have it?
No, I don't. My brother actually knew
long
it,
time
but,
ago. Long time ago.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
I think the big question, Kathy, did you have it for long?
Did it go?
Yes. Yes, a little box Escort. It was a beautiful little car.
Oh, good. Thank you.
So it got you out of Worcester. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Kathy.
Thanks, Aaron.
Kathy out in Durbanville. I want to just touch on that Afrikaans because I think it's necessary that the true history of Afrikaans is also told. So this language was the language that came about here because very many people settled here. How do you perceive that history, and how did it come about?
Well, it's the slave history of the Cape, and it's a creolization that takes place in this melting pot between Devil's Peak, Lion's Head, and Table Mountain. So the Dutch East India Company, we know that story of the refreshment station and so on, and quickly realized they're not even allowed to enslave the local people. But they need to build an establishment here, and so they start to bring in the slaves from all over the Indian Ocean basin. So you bring in people from all parts, from India and from Indonesia and from Ceylon and from the east coast of Africa, and of course nobody has a common language or common culture. So through that process of trying to communicate. A Creole version of Dutch starts to form in the mouths of slaves. That is the beginnings and the roots of Afrikaans.
So the folks are still speaking Dutch, and this creolized language is unfolding alongside it.
The Dutch are speaking Dutch.
Yeah.
They do not speak Afrikaans. This is a misconception, this idea that, dis onze taal, die Afrikaanse taal is... You see, if you speak Dutch, there's no reason to change to Afrikaans. It's not like you'd invent a new language. The only reason you start speaking Afrikaans is to communicate with the people who work for you,
Sure.
because they're speaking this language, so you start to speak that.
Right.
Right, and your children are brought up by these women who are your slaves, and they speak this
Afrikaans.
creolized Dutch,
Afrikaans.
this let's call Afrikaans, and then this concept of of Ek is van Afrika and, Afrikaner
Identity.
Afrikaner identity. Well, very interesting part of history there.
And that's breaking that umbilical with the European ancestry, essentially, the Afrikaan.
Ek ben een Afrikaner.
Yep. Now, and I believe that the slaves were first, so the first examples of written Afrikaans, the first written Afrikaans was written by Muslim imams in the city.
Yes, phonetically, yeah.
So that's the history, and you say it then opened up this avenue of Afrikaanse music.
That realization, that it's not, as I say, one didn't want to, even though I spoke it, I didn't want to identify with because of the political implications.
Sure.
One bought into that idea very much, and that's how I was brought up. Afrikaans is onze taal, dis ons eie, dis cultuur, and then you start to see this is all BS. This claiming and this appropriation of songs and things. But then if you look at the whole of the creolization of the Cape, this works in so many aspects. The architecture of the Cape is a Creole architecture. So is the food. The food that we talk about here are these influences that mix together. The music is the same thing as the language, and we need to understand that. And I think it would be great if we just celebrated that much more.
I agree with you, and if that kind of history can be just a little more available, then maybe we can embrace it even more so. You matriculated in Worcester, and then you were in Leeds. You went to the UK as well. You studied there.
I studied at Leeds University.
You could easily have stayed there and sung Chuck Berry songs for the rest of your life. Or did you fall in love with Worcester and you needed to come back?
No, I had an obligation to come back. Because I had got a bursary from a textile factory in Worcester, which was called Hextex at the time, and they sent me to Leeds University to study textile designing, which I did, and that's what I graduated with a BA in textile design. But then I had to come back to Worcester to work for the bursary, and the thing is, I was already. In Leeds, I was already starting to write the first kind of David Kramer songs using satire and kind of, social, political observation.
That satire would get you into trouble in 1980. Bakgat was banned, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Was that your first album?
My very first album was Bakgat, yeah. Which, a lot of those kind of songs, the mixing of the languages, mixing... and the swearing, it's probably, now it's commonplace, but in those years, I was...
You were pushing the envelope.
I was pushing it, and they didn't like it, and, certainly didn't like the way I was singing in Afrikaans, because it was suggesting... straattaal, It was suggesting the people of the street spoke like this, and this wasn't the agenda that Pretoria was pushing at the time, and certainly not through the auspices of the SABC. So they just banned the whole album. There were some, some songs that I could understand, but some of them were like pretty innocent and
just paranoia. There's something in it. We haven't found it yet.
Songs that became big hits later on. It was challenged at the time. A song like Biscuits and Biltong, even a song like Christian Swart, and were challenged, and these songs became hits for me. And the interesting thing at that time is that the album went gold with no radio play, and that's when the record company that was EMI at the time sat up and started to take notice.
Did Volkswagen have a role in it going gold? Because that was in the early 80s as well.
No. I wasn't
this
with Volkswagen.
predates...
that was 3 years before Volkswagen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but what role did Volkswagen? We just heard. So clearly, you have an association with Volkswagens.
Yeah, so I became very. Look, I had these big hits with Hakon Blokkies and the Royal Hotel and Stocksila Leon, and I just had a series of hits, and I was top of the Springbok Hit Parade, and my concerts were selling out everywhere, and so I had been approached. This guy's quite a interesting history because Volkswagen had been using Jeremy Taylor to sing the song for the VW bus, and then for some reason Jeremy Taylor decided he didn't want to do the next one, and because they had heard about me and they knew about me, they asked me if I wanted to write the song, and I also wasn't really interested in going into that line, you know. So they came to see one of my concerts, and they liked what they saw, this kind of everyman idea that I was sort of portraying as a persona, you know, like a guy on a bicycle and a blick guitar and a, velschooner. And I just kind of, you couldn't really identify me in strict apartheid terms in those years. And so they approached me to become part of the campaign, and I said I really didn't want to be. I certainly didn't want to endorse the Volkswagen microbus. I said there's no way I'm going to drive this thing, lean out of the window and say, "No, die bus is die bus vir julle." You know, you buy this bus. I said if you can find a way of like keeping me as David Kramer and the bus, and which is what they did, and a very clever marketing move, whereby I was always just the guy on the bicycle chasing the bus, and there was a family that drove around in this Volkswagen bus, and the whole family values thing of the bus, and so those commercials, which were about 1 minute long, created. I became very well known through the VW bus commercials. Everybody in the country had seen me on the commercials. They might not have heard my music, but they knew me as the guy with the red shoes and the middle parting in his hair.
And the hat, and we're going to find out where that comes from.
The hat
and that
later.
Roy Velschooner, I'm surprised I didn't think there's a commie there's a commie coming with those Roy Velschooner.
Well, some people did.
I know there's a voice note in. Let's take a listen to the voice note. Thank you,
Oh,
Joe.
David, I must tell you, the last 2 weeks I've been on a 4,000 kilometer motorbike trip with some buddies to Lesotho and the Transkei. We stayed in 3 different royal hotels, and your song became an anthem for our trip. Royal Hotel, Hakon Blokkies, Tommy Dippenaar, boys had a great time, super memories. I grew up with your music and I love you, man. Keep doing what you're doing. You are amazing. It's Barry in Century City.
And big thank you, Barry. You want to respond there, David?
Yeah, well, that's great, Barry. You said Imana in a Royal Hotel. People always ask, which Royal Hotel was it? And, it wasn't one in particular. It was a kind of generic Royal Hotel, which was informed by my early years in hotels in Worcester.
Didn't you get I got jealous just listening to him. 4,000 kilometers around Lesotho on a motorbike. I mean, what a pleasure.
Well
It's the
done,
kind of
Barry.
holiday that I
Good
need.
for you. I wish I could do something like that.
Okay. I know we're going to play a song in a short while that informed a very important era. Let's take not ready yet, but it's that relationship between you and Talib that happened right about the mid-80s. How did that come about? Was it just like, actually you told me, but I want you to tell everybody else.
Okay.
So
Well,
preempt anything.
I'd met Talib in the 70s. I did a folk concert, and he was with Des Dawn at that time, and that's when I first met him. Heard him sing, and he heard me sing, and then in the 10 years in between, I went off and I started the recording and performing, and had these hits that we were talking about, and then by 1985, 86, I was feeling a bit burnt out, and I wanted to do something different and something new, and I had this idea that I'd like to write a musical, and so it struck me again that what had happened in District 6 20 years earlier, it was declared for whites only. and and it was 1986, and it was now an anniversary, and I started to think about that, and I thought it could make a very good subject for a musical, and I was researching that and started to write some songs around it. And I went down to the Civic Centre because they were having an exhibition, and they were, with images of District 6, and there was they were showing films. And one of the films that they showed was a film called Grandfather, Your Right Foot is Missing. And it was this, film about forced removals. And walked in there, and I saw Tali Peterson was sitting there with some of the members of his band Sapphire. And we kind of nodded, watched the film, and after the film, we said, "Hello, what you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm sort of thinking about writing something for the stage." And he said, "Yeah. Also, I want to revive. I did this Carnival a la District 6, and I also want to write a musical." I said, "Well, I'm thinking about all this, and maybe we should have coffee and talk." And so we went, and immediately we had coffee and started talking about the ideas that we might have. He was very keen to create and bring a big musical onto the stage, and I had never done anything like that before, but it was a direction that I wanted to move in. And we just clicked. We found that we had different strengths.
Let's get into that strengths. We want to see how these ideas unfolded into stuff that we would encounter on stage in a short while. But let's go to Abram. He's going to recount some kind of Kramer concert back in the day. Abraham, are you there?
I'm still here.
Okay, please go ahead. David Kramer is listening.
Okay, good morning, David.
Morning.
My name is Abraham. When my youngest son was growing up, he was crazy. Well, we were all crazy about David Kramer, the man with the red boots and the funny way he was singing and playing the guitar. And when he was 5.5 years old, he just finished the crash part of his growing up life, and he was going to go to school the next year. And they had a concert. And they said, what is my son gonna do? And he said he's gonna sing a David Kramer song, and so he went on stage, and he had on a black pants, I remember, and a white shirt, and I had a green hat which I put on his head, and the hat was almost like a David Kramer style at the back of his head.
Yes.
And then he started singing. Hier sit die manne in die Royal Hotel.
Ja.
Ons vir almal lekker almal se pel. So the people, in the concert, they thought he was just going to sing the chorus.
Yes.
And then when he was finished with the chorus, he said, "Ken julle wat Boeta sê bynaam is Dokter?"
Okay. This is a 5.5-year-old.
This is a 5.5 years old David.
Singing about doping in the Royal Hotel.
Yeah, he was singing. He sang the whole song.
Well,
and it was so amazing,
Yes.
and I remember that until today.
Now that's what's amazing.
I was so glad when I heard that David was, you were on the Clarence show going to be. And the other thing, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
The last thing, David, I want to say is you were talking about the District 6, the musical. Me and my wife also saw that. It is amazing. It was amazing. I really loved it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay.
I just thought I get that in there, and I'm so glad that I was listening to the radio now to hear that you are on the radio.
Okay.
I love that that musical. It was really beautiful.
Good to hear from you. Very good to hear from you.
Thank you, Abram.
David. You have a nice day and continue the good work that you're doing,
Okay, you too.
All right, God bless.
Thank you, Abram. God bless you too. What an enthusiastic,
all right. Bye-bye.
content. Thank you, Abram. Okay, so we want to. We're not ready yet. I just want to get some music going. But I want to talk about that relationship. What roles did yourself and Tali, was it distinctive and different roles, or was there?
It became different roles. Became very distinctive. But in the beginning, we were finding our way, and I came to the table with some songs, and Tali came to the table with some songs that he'd written that we thought would work and fit into this musical. And then, I think one of the the very first thing that we did, and I'd written the lyrics to the 7 Steps of Stone. And I showed him that lyric, and I said, well, let's see, you take this and maybe you can put some music to it. And he went off with the lyric, and he came back the next morning and played me the beautiful melody of 7 Steps of Stone. And that's when we saw the potential of how we were going to work together. He had written songs like So Long Goodbye and This Time, and he'd written the new It's New Year Carnival song. I, in turn, had written Bruce Mebra and songs like Khalima and Hester. So we joined forces. But as the years went on, and I mean, we wrote quite a lot of stuff together, it became very much almost like Bernie Taupin and Elton John, where I would write the lyric and I would just hand it over to Talib and he would do the music.
Nearly instinctively.
Yeah, and it worked well. And okay, there was sometimes a little bit of, how did you hear this? What did you thinking here? And so on. But, a song like Welcome to Cape Town was exactly that, worked like that.
Did David Kramer and Tali Peterson die with his death?
Well, that combination of songwriting, absolutely, yeah.
Nobody can fill that space.
I haven't found anyone else who could collaborate with me in that way.
Does that mean the sound that you nurtured into fruition and success is no longer?
I think that particular way of writing, yes, is no longer.
Are you serious? It's sad.
Yeah. I mean, I still write, I'm still writing and I've done similar things, but my approach to the music is different to what Talib would have done. I just that's what the strength was. He just had a wonderful sense of melody and he had a wonderful ear for harmony, the arrangements and so on. And we had a string of beautiful songs, that which are not going to be repeated. I mean, it doesn't matter what I do. You really find theatre. You did so much for the music, and you created monsters. And I say it in the most beautiful sense of the word. I'm talking about the Emo Adams, and I'm talking about the Alistair Isobels that have come through your schooling, and suggest, given their success, that it was a lot more about talent, a lot more than talent that you nurtured amongst young people. Yeah, the nurturing of talent was extremely important, and both Talib and I felt that that we needed to get the next generation for them to understand that they needed to tell their own story, and they needed to believe in their talent, and they needed and also we were moving into an era where opportunity was becoming available. So the young. I
also see the discipline there. Tell me about the discipline. How did you inculcate discipline?
Well, we both Talib and I were quite strict on discipline. You don't come late to a rehearsal with me. There's no I'm sorry the buses were running late or whatever. You have to be on time with rehearsals for me. Otherwise, I don't really want to work with you. And then the discipline of learning all the words in the show. You have to stick to the script. You can't just make up your own words. You have to learn the steps, the dance steps. So there's a lot of work that goes into a show, and it wasn't just how you're feeling on the night and so the discipline was there, and I think also we provided an example that they could follow. We were successful with what we did. We believed in this idea of using your own voice, telling your own story, and celebrating your background. And they saw the success of that, and they were encouraged to move into that direction in their own way. So yes, there've been many successes that have come out of the musicals. I mean, there are
huge.
Huge. There's a lot of them. We're not mentioning all the names, but there are a lot of people.
Cutton Kings. We can go on and on and on and on. I've got another interview lined up, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. But I wanted to ask you if you are denying future generation of theatre goers from experiencing the delight that District 6 and the other productions that you and Peterson had put up over the years. Why is it that it's not still playing out? I have no doubt it could still be playing out to full houses.
Well, I hope so. I mean, there's always a possibility of revivals.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there are, but musicals are, quite a big and expensive project. So yes, I do hope that there will, some of these musicals like Cut and the Kings and District 6 the musical, and others that I've done have been so popular in the past that there's always a chance of revival. I don't think they're just going to die, and the music continues to be popular. I see that on the internet.
Thank you so very much for sharing some of your life with us, David Kramer.